Watch closely, everyone. The miracle of life is happening. See? Isn't this cool? We can do fun stuff right here in our class.
Ew, it's wet.
Yes, that would be the amniotic fluid. It creates a pillow around the fetus. It protects it.
Ew, and it's scaly.
Yes, it's scaly.
It's a snake!
Welcome back to Restorative Justice Reflections. I'm David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for all the ancestors, and today I'm here with Asha Sudra to dive deep into the restorative themes, or lack thereof, found in Season 1, Episode 6 of ABC's Abbott Elementary Gifted program. As always, our conversation here is not a critique of the story choices or production choices of the creators, but we'll highlight how restorative justice could apply to situations where you're allocating resources, honoring multiple intelligences of students, and so much more. Hopefully, this will give you some insight about how to apply restorative ways of being into your life in and out of the classroom. If you want to take a deeper look at applying restorative justice to your life, join our Inner Circle community to connect with RJ-minded individuals and get bonus content. Deepen your practice by checking out our courses. And if you want to see this work in your school or organization, invite us for coaching or training on implementing this work. Of course, the links to everything down below. Now let's get to it. Really excited to have this conversation with Asha. Tell the people about yourself.
What's up, y'all? David, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. Love getting an opportunity to chop it up and talk with you. What's good, people? My name is Asha Sudra. I go by she, her, Ben, bruh, fam, whatever you want to call me is clever. I am an educator out here in the Bay Area, disabled, queer poet, multidisciplinary artist, and I'm also the mother of 2 incredibly cute pit bulls. And I'm a big fan of Abbott Elementary. I'm not going to lie.
You know, we were having a conversation on this restorative justice life. And if you want to tap into that conversation, we'll link that below as well. But, you know, as we were coming to the conclusion of our conversation, I was sharing you the idea for this podcast. And you were like, ooh, I want to talk about this episode, the gifted program episode. And, you know, we're going to get into that in a second. But tell me about your Abbott fandom. What about the show resonates so deeply for you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just shouts to Quinta Brunson and the team of creating such a truly authentic show that airs on primetime, like regular television. Like, it's truly incredible. I remember Donald Glover spoke about just the way in which he was able to create such nuanced and intricate characters and storylines, all within kind of the framework of primetime TV. So, I mean, as a public school educator for 10 years, actually more than 10 years, you know, I really just saw a lot of the experiences that were being portrayed in Abbott, actually in my real life, in my own career experience. And I know that, you know, there's a satire to things and it's comedic. And it was almost to a point where I was laughing because I had those same experiences, not because it was necessarily funny, although I think the show is really funny. And yeah, I mean, to the point where, you know, I am currently a teacher in pre-service education. And so I work with 2 universities out here in the Bay Area with folks that are getting their master's in their teaching credential. And I teach a variety of classes within the program. And I often show Abbott Elementary in class. And I think when we were recording our episode of This Restorative Life, I was teaching a class on multiple modalities, working with kids of all different learning styles and types. And so this episode just really fit perfectly into that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on this restorative justice life, we were talking about, you know, your experiences in schools, both as a classroom teacher, both as somebody who supports doing restorative justice work, and now like in your teacher education role, right? There's so much to unpack here through all of those lenses. So I'm really excited to dive into this with you, right? We have this episode, we're going to focus on the A storyline, right? After seeing a smart boy transferring to Abbott Elementary, Janine is inspired to start a gifted program at their school, with Jacob being the lead teacher of that. However, a lot of the students not in the gifted program start to feel left out, and this causes Janine to try to replicate the gifted programs that she experienced growing up in her school, only to accidentally release snakes into the school, which leads to all kinds of hijinks. But with the advice from Gregory, Janine dismantles the gifted program in favor of creating a rotational enrichment program for all the students. When you saw this episode, what stuck out to you?
Oh man, I mean, so much. I think though that it's really put together so clearly and so really eloquently, and I mean, talk about eloquence. The man is just a brilliant display of what it means to be a man in today's age. But so the character, right, Gregory Eddie, is talking to Janine.
When you give some kids chickens, other kids are gonna get snakes. If you get snakes for long enough, that's what you think you deserve.
And no one deserves snakes.
And I thought that was just a perfect way of kind of wrapping the big theme of that narrative that's woven throughout the storyline. And it speaks to such a larger conversation around deficit thinking and equitable practices, right, that we see in real life education today.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of people who are in education and in other social service spaces, even like customer service spaces, who like are so well-intentioned, wanting to provide the best service they can, the most resources they can to the people that they're serving, right? And Janine, well-intentioned as she is, Jacob, well-intentioned as he is, like have all of this energy to try to provide an experience for students like that was reflective of what they had. Like Jacob was like, I want to like till the soil to like help these fertile minds.
Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Right? Like all of these things, like we love the enthusiasm and the impact of those actions, aren't always what was intended, right? When we think about restorative justice, when we're thinking about conflict and harm and other situations, we're often saying like, what happened, like who was involved, who was impacted and how, right? And what needs to be done in order to be in right relationship, who's responsible for making those changes. We have this idea, we have this little bit of resource to go create this program, and Jacob and Janine decide to run with it, right? Privileging a small group of students who like are getting a lot of benefit, I imagine, in the couple of minutes we see of the program happening in their in this 21 minutes of TV, right? And then the majority of other students being excluded, right? And that's why Gregory's bringing up the point of like, we feel like snakes, like that's what we deserve because we are not deemed good enough, quote unquote, by these standards that have been set by, well, in some ways that have been arbitrarily set by Janine and Jacob, right?
That's
and
right.
The impact of that is huge. And so like they do take some kind of corrective action, but like this is something that we see happening in schools every day, all the time. What are some of the ways that you thought about, the way that Jacob and Janine initially acted, and what are some of the ways that you've seen this play out in schools that you've been a part of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, in education, we often hear this term, and it happens a lot in education. And I have to admit, like, I'm biased. I've spent a lot of my adult life in educational spaces, but we hear this phrase, assume positive intentions. And what often happens, right, is a cloaking, is a kind of disregard for those who are impacted. And you sort of see this in the beginning of the episode. Gregory is not really talking a lot about his opinion or his experience.
I think we should get rid of the gifted program.
Gregory, I can't believe you're saying this. Thought you liked the gifted program. Like earlier when well, I guess you never said you liked it.
Kid, I didn't get into the gifted program, like not even close. Made me feel like school was only for kids who were good at taking tests, which I was not. So I checked out.
I don't know what to say.
And so I think that, one, a lot of the times we don't get to that listening stage that Janine and Jacob too, but I think Janine and Eddie really showcase this kind of dialogue a little bit. But I don't think we often have that part in our real world society. I don't see that I don't see that taking place in education currently, where folks are really asking that question of who or how is this being harmed, or at what cost rather. And so that's sort of kind of one aspect of it. And so I did appreciate that Abbott Elementary brought the kind of ideal, the fantasy, the sunshine and rainbows, so to speak, kind of outlook on that. But I do think that we get lost a lot of the time in our intentions. And so that course correction doesn't always necessarily happen. And I'm not saying whether or not like their decision to do a couple weeks at a time at the end of the episode is the best decision, but that they at least had some time to reflect and then reiterate is something that I appreciated seeing, because I don't necessarily see that in education today.
Yeah. Is there a specific example that you can think of the good intention and negative impact? Of course, like not asking you to name names.
So I think that currently, when I think about how this kind of plays out in education today, I think of like two major programs that I've seen, right? And that's one is like how we're supporting multilingual students. That can look like and be sort of titled as ELD. It can be designated, it can be integrated. There's a variety of different jargonized words that we use about how we support these students. Even calling them multilingual students is not technically what you might hear in the greater majority of education, right? A lot of the times we'll call these folks English learners. And I think that the way in which those resources are allocated is drastically different. There's not a lot of systems in place for it, and it's really punitive for the individual, especially if you're in those programs for a really long time. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about as far as kind of allocation of resources and this kind of, we're trying to do the best thing that we can is certainly just, I mean, what I'm doing right now is a lot of facilitation around quote unquote restorative justice or restorative practices. I see a lot of box checking. I see a lot of, sort of, we're trying to do our best, and then not a lot of follow through. And so again, how they come up with a different solution to try to be more equitable for their students is something I kind of appreciated, because oftentimes when folks get to that point of a mirror in front of them, they tend to kind of back away.
Yeah, I think about what came up in episode 4, like the new tech episode, where like, hey, there's this new initiative and like just learn how to use this software, right? Instead of, hey, these are the core principles that we're trying to instill in everybody, and this is the way that this software is going to help us, and like these are the ways that you're going to be accompanied to, be supported in the integration of this, right? There's often not like the time to integrate, or like to even like critically think like, is this something that is going to serve us well, right? And this happens all the time within the context of schools. Go back and listen to episode 4 of this to hear our conversation with Brittany Jefferson on that little piece. But when we think about that, the way that programs or resources are played out in schools, right? They're almost always somebody's good intentions. And, I think it's important that, like you were saying, we are taking the time to evaluate the impact and then make corrective action, right? In this case, we do see Janine and Jacob like stop and be reflective of both Gregory's experience as he's articulating what some of the students might be experiencing, and listening to the students who are really just feeling left out and undeserving. And, as funny as it is to have snakes loose in the classroom, right? We do see like other harm and the exclusion that comes at the cost of exclusion. And so, definitely want to invite people who are doing this work to make sure that as you're bringing these programs together, you are taking those times to evaluate like the impact, right? Not just say like, hey, we're just going to execute full steam ahead. And hey, it worked for these kids. Beautiful. Let's celebrate. Like, really great job. Beautiful that these students got to experience that. At what cost to your community, right? And so as we see them decide like, hey, we're going to do this on a rotating basis where lots of other students are going to get to participate in this, not with the same frequency, right? Because we do have finite resources, just like many schools do. Like that is a way that that could have been addressed. If you're appreciating this video, like to help us in the YouTube algorithm, subscribe so you won't miss a video, and share it with someone to help us further amplify this work. Now back to the show. As you watch this, like what were some of the other things that came to mind as, you know, potential solutions or outcomes for this situation?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, I used this particular episode when I was teaching a class specifically on working with students of different abilities. And yes, the GATE program comes up in our discussions as it's something that we want, folks to be aware of as they're entering the field of education. But really, the takeaway that I try to encourage my students to process and reflect through is how can our lessons, our units encompass, as Gregory puts it, the multiple intelligences, right? As I would expand upon it, the multiple learning modalities that we can use as teachers, the different types of activities and strategies that we can use so that different types of learners are having an access point throughout the learning, right? We know that learning doesn't happen in a silo or doesn't happen in an individual instance, and that it is cyclical, and we revisit ideas and process through and kind of move through, whether it's the DOK or the Blooms, whatever you want to describe it. But that throughout that depth and throughout that journey, that there are multiple access points. So where is art in your learning, right? Where is movement and the opportunity to build with one another in collaboration and in community? Where is the opportunity to share that learning to the greater community, whether it's outside the classroom or the larger community outside the gates, right? And this is where that applicable knowledge comes in. And I think, we're talking about the episode, right? The very, I think, last seconds of the episode.
So if the store has 10 potatoes, right, and you take away 2 of them, how many potatoes would the store have left?
I don't like potatoes.
Let's not focus on that part of it.
You have 8 potatoes.
Right? And I think that though is honestly how we learn is through these engaging and experiential activities. And so we don't only need yes, resources, limitations, curriculum, all of these different things. And every classroom teacher can create units and lessons that have multiple modalities, that have conversations with students around multiple intelligences and multiple ways of viewing or breaking down, decolonizing, right? Really the word intelligence and smart and how we kind of define and redefine that. So I've done that with every single age group that I work with, because actually it's what we do in our first couple weeks of learning and growing together. It's actually what I'm creating an entire curriculum to use with a middle school in August actually of this year, where students and teachers will sit together in community of practice groups with each other and talk about their different ways of learning and different approaches to working together in groups and things like that. So really, I mean, what it looks like in a second grade or first grade level is honestly quite similar to how it would be with adults, but it really starts with and there's a lot of resources out there, but different types of surveys, different types of conversations around how to kind of evaluate, are you more tactile? Are you more kinesthetic? Are you more auditory or visual? What types of intelligences, right, you're into? And we can talk about Einstein was one who kind of, I think, like delved into that a little bit. I think that there's a lot of different ways that we can also, with adults, Goldie Mohammed is a wonderful educator and practitioner who is exploring the multitude of an individual, right? And that those things are all valid in a variety of different ways. And she sort of got that knowledge and that framework from Black literacy schools. And so the reality is that I think the global majority in spaces that are intergenerational have been having this conversation for a long time. I think that we've been building each other up, right? I think that we've been dreaming and creating a future that is that just embraces us as a whole. I think that we know that a Western education or institutionalized education system tends to box us into different categories, and we lose that interdisciplinary. And so the irony is that when we lose the interdisciplinary, we also lose the intersectional. And I think that those two are inherently tied, and I think it's actually quite targeted and deliberate. I don't know if they realized it as they were doing it, but it's certainly helping keep us separated when we separate our disciplines too.
Whether or not it's deliberate is, up for debate. I tend to try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but like for us right now, people who are trying to have these conversations, trying to build these containers where learning can take place in a generative way where people can be valued for what they bring, right? Some of those things just take time on the front end, like you're saying, to really evaluate who your community is and what your specific community needs, and not just teach a curriculum that like was created for a certain group of people in a certain time, and be adaptable, right? Adapt to the needs of your community. And I know within the context of your school day where you have like less than a prep period to like try to do all of the things and like are expected to do everything else to like make customized lessons for like all these people, like that can seem overwhelming, right? And that's a structural issue within the context of schools, right? If teachers aren't given the time to prepare well, right, they're going to come to this place of burnout. Over the course of the show, we see Barbara and Melissa in so many ways be like, you young people who have energy, go and try and do that. Like, I'm not going to do this, right? I think Barbara says in this episode, if it's upsetting more people, then not, like, I just don't think it's worth it, right? And there are two ways to think about that. One is just being like defeatist and like, hey, I can't do anything about this, so, y'all go deal with it. Or like, hey, I understand what's in my capacity within my role, and that's just not something that I'm going to take on right now. And we've got to be honest with ourselves about, what capacity we do have in order to do that. I'm not saying that like everyone should like overextend themselves in order to like build these systems and build this curriculum. But for school leaders and for people who are thinking about the ways that people's time, adults' time is allocated within the context of schools, right? What is the time that we're giving people to both prepare to do this within their respective context, and be supported in learning to do this if that wasn't something that was a part of their teacher education?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, there is a sort of call and a need for some radical acceptance around what is within our realm of control as a public school teacher. Particularly in California, we'd call it like a Title I school, right? A place where maybe perhaps resources, personnel, skill sets are potentially limited. And I think that, even though, Barbara does kind of, and I think that's kind of her character in a lot of ways, right? Is to kind of realize the constraints of what you're able to have. I think that there's a merit to all of it, right? And I think that even if we look like historically through movements or through change, oftentimes it has come at the heels of youth, right? And so, yes, there are elders leading the way. Yes, there are elders guiding. And shout out to some of these young teachers really trying to do something and shake something up. And so I appreciate it. I do think, though, that there has to be this knowledge of sort of that whole experience and having that dialogue and the conversation. And so I think that, they do a good job of 21 minutes or whatever of kind of showcasing the most idyllic way in which that can happen. But I'm not mad at the young folks coming into education and wanting to shake things up, because that was me. I do, though, appreciate all the mentors that I had in those beginning years who helped me calibrate, who helped me explore and understand that realm of control, and sort of help me with my expectations as well. And I think Janine and Barbara have that kind of relationship with each other.
Yeah, or it's growing, 6 episodes in at this point, right? Is there a time or an experience that stood out to you of like one of those times that your expectations need to be calibrated and how that person, helped you through that?
Yes, 1000%. I mean, definitely as somebody that came into education, who had experience and desires and a pedagogical sort of foundation around social change, social justice, um, dismantling anti-Blackness, right? All of these different things. When you come into education, certainly as that young, spry, eager first year teacher, I thought folks would be more willing to try different things. And I think that's something that is really antithetical to the sort of growth mindset that we ask our students to have. Is a lot of teachers struggle to have a growth mindset. And that was something that thankfully a mentor of mine named April Mouton, shout out to her, I love her, really helped me kind of understand and sort of recalibrate what that meant and what that could really look like in a short time. She reminded me that this journey is a long haul.
Yeah, we have these like lots of eager, well-intentioned people coming into this field, like who want to make all of this change. And, I think we touched on it a little bit, but like to like just reiterate, right? Doing this work is not about saviorism and paternalism and like, I know what's best, so like I'm going to make these sweeping changes, right? Especially when you're new to an environment, right? It's so important to spend all of your time listening, ears open, right? Like it's not that your perspectives aren't valuable and that you don't have anything to contribute, but you don't know the needs of your community. And if you just come in like this is the way that things need to be, and like why can't you all be like this, right? Like that's not a really good way to like make sustainable change, speaking to the long haul of it all, right? Doing this work through relationships, getting to know folks and allowing people to tell you what they need, tell you how you can be supportive, and then like offering the ways that like you've thought a little bit differently about how things could be, is often so much easier and more effective. Slower, maybe initially, but long term, much more effective in making lasting change.
Yeah, and really like that's how you build folks that stay with you in it, right? I don't really like the term allyship, but for a lack of a better word, right, for a co-conspirator, like that's how you keep folks in the movement with you, right? And so it can't be this kind of one-off thing. It does have to, and ironically, right, just like our students and their learning, it's this cyclical thing that we continuously come back to, and that we come back to in a multitude of ways.
Right. We need to be reminded so much more than we're taught. And those reminders come in lots of forms.
Yeah, we just got to be open to hearing them and listening to it.
Yeah, yeah. Again, there are lots of other things going on in this episode in the B story that we're not quite going to touch on. But was there anything else from this gifted program storyline that you wanted to highlight before we start to wind down our time?
No, I mean, I think really that the biggest thing that we, as educators, as folks that are working with youth, that are working with the global majority as they are finding themselves, is we really have to be mindful of the language that we use, of the ways in which we categorize, label. You see Janine in the episode trying to figure out how to label or call the students that are not that are not in the GATE program.
Look, there's nothing wrong with the gifted program itself. We just need to organize it better so that the regular kids, the ungifted kids, the regifted kids.
Let's lift up the other kids.
Yes, that.
Right. And I think though that while comical, we see this and it's in policy and it's in student handbooks. And so really we have to ask ourselves as educators, what is the messaging that we're sending, right? At what cost?
Mhm.
And while the intention might be good, it's really important to consider the perception, and to care really heavily about that. And when faced with perhaps a different perception than one that was intended, to slow down
Yeah.
and to listen and ask questions if it's okay, but to really, sit with it, and think a bit about what the implications of that are, and what potentially are some ways to move around it.
You've heard from us. Now we want to hear from you. Drop your restorative justice reflections in the comments. And if you want to join a live community conversation about our restorative justice lessons from Abbott Elementary, join us for a live event on Monday, July 31st. Link with more info in the description. But now it's time to answer the question that everyone answers when they come here. So you have the ear of Quinta and the writers. Pitch yourself as a character on Abbott Elementary, and what is your story arc?
Yes, I love it. I love it because listen, Quinta, girl, like we need to tag her because this could be a potential. Feel me? Number one, look at me. I already work for it, right? So you get this new teacher of color that's all tattooed up and is all like, hey, bro, with the kids and everything. And is also just super annoying about all of the problematic things that are happening in everything, right? So I've been this person on campus. I hope that one of my former coworkers sees this and just giggles, because this is how self-aware I am, y'all. That person that always just kind of raises their hand in the back of the meeting and is like, well, actually, historically, and really just listen. I think that, and the times that we're in, this could be a really funny character, honey. I got the history. I already know it. I know all the jargon. Let me cis, hetero, patriarchal, hegemony. Let me throw all the words out so that I annoy the rest of the staff and they all just roll their eyes and tune me out every
I'm
time.
gonna out Jacob.
I'm gonna out Jacob, but like do it in a a less like shit. I'm still corny though, so I was an elementary school teacher. I know what it is. Yes, but just you know what? But Jacob's sneaker game is hard. Fuck, why am I Jacob?
I'm just saying.
It's so funny, right? But I mean, listen, like I think that is just so funny, that I think all of the archetypes that she's created, that the crew has created for this show, we can see ourselves as educators in all of them just a bit. And I
Mhm.
think that that's the magic in it, is that she's calling a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversation into something that is so fucking relatable. Like it just is, you can see yourself in all of these different situations and scenarios. And just shouts to her and the beautifulness of what she's created.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, wisdom, stories, experiences. How can people support you and your work in the way that you want to be supported?
Yeah, well, I'm out here in the South Bay Area of California, currently working to roll out some art-based trauma-informed workshops with high school students and 8th grade students. So if you like the way that I talk and analyze and you want to know more about that, holler, hit me up. You can find me at ashapoet.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at asha_poet. I also got a couple books published out here, and I'm performing a lot out in the Bay Area. So come find me.
Beautiful. Of course, all of those things will be linked below. But again, thank you so much. And we'll be back with a restorative justice reflection on episode 7, Art Teacher, very soon. Until then, take care.